17 folks were arrested this past weekend in Ferguson during Ferguson October. 4 days of protests led by the late Michael Brown's mother, Leslie McSpadden. The protests come days after the shooting death of another black teen, Vonderrit Myers Jr., by a white police officer. Investigators say 18-year-old Myers fired at the off-duty officer and that a 9mm handgun was found at the scene. Myers' family insists that he did not have a gun in his hand, but a recently purchased sandwich. And so there have been lots of protests there. They also had, of course, a big meeting last night. It was billed as an interfaith event featuring Pastor Jamal Bryant, Dr. Cornel West, and others. And so it was packed. Nearly 4,000 people were attending that particular event. But the real question that I still have is a lot of people at that event talking about what is the agenda? What is the agenda? And it seems that here we are 2 months after Mike Brown's death. Here we are nearly 2 years after the shooting death of Roland Martin. And whether you talk about the issue of John Crawford in Ohio, Ezell Ford in Los Angeles, Eric Garner in New York, Victor White III in New Iberia, Louisiana. You have Chavis Carter in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Earlier on the show, we talked to the attorney for a gentleman, Ernest Satterwhite, 68 years old, shot and killed by an officer in his driveway after a low-speed car chase. The officer broke all of department procedures, did not try to order him out of the car, simply stuck his gun in the driver's side window and fired several shots, killing him. That officer was indeed indicted, but there was no bill for voluntary manslaughter, indicted in terms of misconduct in his office. But it speaks to still, what is the agenda? Who is leading the agenda, and will it be top down or bottom up? So we go back to Lauren Victoria Burke, George Jefferson Nuri, and also we have Stacey Johnson. And this is the thing that you could call another meeting. You can have 4 days of protest. You can do all of those different things. But at some point, just like we talked about what's happening in Georgia, they could keep talking about people not being registered.
Right.
Well, then somebody had to say, we're going to register. And we're going to raise the money, and we're going to put the resources behind it, and we're going to hire the people, and we're going to go door to door. We're going to sign them up. That has to take place, as opposed to just protesting and marching.
Exactly right. And we are a people that loves to talk about problems and not have an actual detailed strategy to fix the problems. You can go back further than John Crawford. Obviously, we had Amadou Diallo, we had Michael Stewart. There's a long history in this country of police brutality. And there is no long strategy, there is no long game strategy that's dealt with it that has in some way changed the paradigm and changed the conversation. And that's why we keep having this discussion every decade after decade about a different person. So until we stop having panels, meetings, discussions about things that we know and get to the point where we get to the tipping point where we can influence power, we're going to have this discussion over and over again. And you'll notice in the black community, there are no groups that do the things that the most effective lobbying groups do, the APACs and the NRAs. The only group I can think of that really does it is Color of Change. When it comes to targeting power and embarrassing people and calling people out and telling their constituencies and their big mailing lists, this is what the problem is. We don't have enough of that.
Joy, I have linked, this is how I've linked voting. You vote for, let's just say on the city level, you vote for the mayor, city council. They hire the police chief. They also have a hand in what that policy is in that police department. So now all of a sudden, it's not just I'm voting for a city council member. I'm voting for the person who's going to hire that police officer or that police chief, who's going to determine policies of his police department, who's going to determine how they should act, who's going to be the one who says we need body cameras as well. And so that voting goes 3-4 layers deep, and I think that connection has to be made. But again, the voting piece is one thing. After you voted, showing up to city council meetings, committee hearings,
holding them
all
accountable.
of that, because now it's a matter of holding folks accountable.
Right. You know, I think that those kind of strategies come out of calmer heads. I think that for a generation or more, we have influenced politics out of our rage. And there should be great rage in Ferguson and in places around the country where black men are being slaughtered in the street by the people hired to protect them. There should be great rage, but there has to be a way for us to take that rage and channel it into something that is productive, as you were saying. I think, as you've said on the radio show earlier today, we've got to run for office. We can't just petition politicians to do what we want. We've got to support those candidates, and as you were saying, we've got to hold politicians accountable without a Molotov cocktail in our hands. And I'm for the protests. I'm for being out there in the streets. But what are we going to do tomorrow? Are we going to be at the polls? Are we going to hold the Justice Department, straight through the Secretary of State of Georgia, accountable for behaviors? And that's only going to happen when they fear our vote.
Stacey.
In addition to what they just said, that's so true. But it seems as though the only thing that gets anyone moving, any group of people moving, is some sort of tragedy. And this tragedy had to occur to get the people of Ferguson moving. I've been talking to a lot of the community activists in Ferguson. And the thing they feel that has to be done is community policing. They believe that community policing will maybe lower the amount of unjustifiable homicides by these police officers. You can't get community policing unless it is enacted by the police chief.
Right.
You can't get that unless you have a police chief who actually wants to believe in it. And so, which goes to, if you are a person who's an activist in Ferguson, there has to be a mechanism where you literally are registering people to vote, but more importantly, who are the people who are going to be running for city council?
Let me finish that point. Okay. They're doing that. They have to start somewhere. You have
absolutely.
to start somewhere. Honestly, they didn't have it before. Right. So now they're starting to organize it now and talk about the things that need to be done specific to Ferguson, because we know that these unjustifiable homicides that have occurred throughout the country. In August, we had 100 alone. In September, by mid-September, we had 80 to 100 of police officers killing men, African-American men.
But let me make this point. Why is it that the black community, in general, need a special set of rules? The police have to behave. We don't need a special set of rules. The law is the law, and the laws are not protecting its citizens. The laws have to change. We don't need yes, I'm not saying that they don't want a community policing force. We can't do that across the country. We can't do that in every black community.
Well,
we have voter laws.
Actually, we can.
I think that you can't keep having a separate set of police in the black community while the other police are misbehaving.
I get what you're saying, but what it comes down to is, and it always comes back to this, it comes back to mobilizing the voters to throw people out of power and putting other people into power. It's going to come back to that. You can have all the protests in the streets you like, but I'm telling you, if you look at what works in politics, it's going to come back to registration and voting people in and out of office.
And I'm going to vote y'all out of this seat because I got to go to a break. Lauren, Joy, Stacey, I surely appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Coming up, folks, are you ready to stop holding back and start